Okay, it looks like people are starting to come in to the webinar. Welcome everyone. Come on in. I will go over a couple quick housekeeping things while people are filtering in. So we are recording this webinar. We will send out the broadcast. If you need to hop or can't make it or just think it is so good, you want to send it to your family and friends, you will have the link to do so. So we will record it. Feel free to chat or Q&A any questions that you want to talk about today if we're not covering it. So love to interact with everyone in the chat. And yeah, I think that's the main rules. So I will go ahead and kick it off with introductions. So I am Mary Foster, VP of Marketing at Ambition. I have been at Ambition about 4 years. And excited to have my guests here today. If some of you noticed on the registration some different photos, we had a couple emergencies come up. And so this might be even better. We have some new guests today. So I'm going to pass it over to Kate, who's first up on my screen, to introduce yourself. Tell us what you do.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So thankful to be here. My name is Kate Michalowski. I work for Melio Payments, which is a fintech startup about 3 years with a viable product here. And I am go-to-market enablement manager, which for us at Melio, enablement can be sort of a vague thing. For us at Melio, that means supporting all of sales and CS on effectiveness and efficiency.
All right, Jason, tell us about yourself.
Very nice. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jason Ross. I'm the VP of Sales at Jobber. Jobber is essentially an app software for home services to run their businesses better. The reason why we exist is to help people in small business be successful, and we do that through technology and adoption of software to organize their business. So I work with the entire sales organization, including enablement, new business expansion, partnerships, etc. Joined about 9 years ago. Started as an account executive, and been around for the crazy ride ever since. But very excited to be here. Thank you to the Ambition team for having me here. We've been partners now for, I think, the better part of 4 years, and so excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Malia, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Malia DiSalvo. I lead the team of sales coaches here at Upwork. We're the world's work marketplace. I've been here not very long, so just kind of getting my tenure here started. I have led full cycle sales teams, been a full cycle salesperson. I have a master's in teaching, so I taught driver's ed and middle school math. So those are fun times. So nothing scares me. And so this is really just marrying all my favorite things together to be able to really help drive impact for our revenue org and our customer's customer, my customer's customer as well, I should say.
Yes, thank you all so much. So why today's conversation matters, what brought us all here is to talk obviously about coaching, but really the reason we even coach, kind of initiatives that people are carrying out. I believe this is from Forrester and surveyed across a number of people of, what are your initiatives for the year? Why would you even be here today? So curious for us at Ambition, developing frontline managers is kind of what we do and a sweet spot for us, but curious if any of these initiatives stand out to you all in your work and, is Forrester on the money here?
I can maybe.
So for, Go
ahead, Jason.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. I mean, my eyes are gravitating towards the star, but it's actually, definitely one of the areas that we're focused on this year, and we're kind of taking a kind of a two-pronged approach here to developing frontline managers. I wouldn't say that we've taken a back seat in terms of enabling our managers, but we have been super IC focused over the last number of years since we've kind of incepted our enablement team. But really a focus this year is frontline managers. And so the two-phased approach is, one is before folks even move into a frontline manager role. And so we're actually in the midst of developing a program right now. It's like a sales leadership career experience where certain folks are going to be able to go through a program, which is really focused on getting them ready to become a frontline manager. We tend to, you know, as best we can, promote from within and develop our own leaders and so on. Sometimes we go external to market, of course, but for the most part, we have such an emphasis on promoting from within that we realize that we need to enable our folks to be more ready for these types of opportunities. So that's kind of phase one. And then phase two is more focused on like enroll for managers and becoming the best managers that they can be. And so developing a program for them. And so definitely one of our top areas of investment this year. And it's kind of timely because we kicked off the project yesterday. So really looking forward to that.
Yes. And, you know, when it comes to the reason these are important and like initiatives, you know, if you read this stat, you know, talking about a huge percent of initiatives fail if you're not essentially enabling your frontline managers to carry them out. That's why it's important. That's why people are trying to invest in content. Like I think I saw Lucy talking about, yeah, we're focused on content and enablement. Hey, we're focused on developing the sellers. It's because ultimately we need to ensure the success of these initiatives being carried out. But development is such an interesting word. It could mean a lot of different things, or enabling your managers could be tool enablement, giving them tools, giving them training, giving them methodology. So I'd love to hear, Kate, from you maybe on what does manager enablement mean to you? Is it tools? Is it training? Kind of, what do you think there?
Yeah, I think it's sort of threefold. It's one, the helping frontline managers create a safe, psychologically safe space to learn and fail and grow. Particularly at Melio, we're a startup. It's a B2B payment platform, so it is a disruptor in the market, and it's also a free product. And we are trying to figure out the go-to-market motions that make sense when sales intervention actually makes an impact on the product-led growth. So I think a lot of that for us is helping the managers to understand how to create that psychologically safe space for reps to be in a mindset where they're open to coaching. So that's the first thing. Second is certainly tooling is so critical. We use Gong as probably our most useful manager enablement tool, serving up the managers calls that need to be coached. So we've identified sort of a set of criteria that we believe make a call a good quality, and we've set it up so that we are serving up calls that don't meet that criteria to the manager so they can coach specifically on those calls, and making sure that there's sort of a focus. And then third, I think it's about their own skill set and making sure that we align across the organization. So we do something called call calibrations, where all the frontline managers in the org listen to call together and talk about how we would coach different aspects of it. So I think there are kind of different components of this that are really critical. And I think a lot of times what you see in sales is you promote your star player, right, to a leadership position, and we miss the gap between being a top performer and helping that top performer understand what made them a top performer and how that might translate to others, and being able to help them see that everybody might not be able to be a cookie cutter replica of the way that they did things. So figuring out how to tap into their individual contributors and use what made them a top performer, but not kind of prescribe that onto all of their individual contributors, I think is really important.
I think that's right. And Malia, you had something really interesting too around, you know, the meeting in a box, because so much you get, you know, like Kate's saying, you get promoted, you're a star seller. Now you're leading other reps, you're a coach yourself. And as someone who coaches the coaches, what do they need to be successful? Because there is a gap.
I think it's so important because as a frontline leader, I will say this until I have no breath left in me, but I think the frontline leader is one of the most important roles in the company. But at the same time, it's like, hey, you're a good rep, you're a good leader, see you later. So I think, you know, just being able to equip them with as much as you possibly can to help them keep the focus narrowed on anything you're trying to have happen. There's so many things being thrown at our sales teams at any given point in time, with territory changes, comp changes, leadership changes, churn, all of these things happening that like as a frontline leader, you're trying to bat and, hit things away and really protect your team as much as possible while still trying to drive them to, be productive and be able to do the things that they need to do to be successful. And so I think, when I think of manager enablement, it's just in ensuring that they have the what they need to keep the focus narrowed on some of the initiatives that are larger scaled. Then they might be able to see the forest through the trees. Do you know what I mean? Because the day-to-day just happens and they can lose sight really easily. I think we all can, of what the larger scale things we're trying to achieve are as a team, as a company. So I think just making sure that we're able to help them stay focused on the bigger initiatives and bigger drives, and also giving them the path to get there without making them find it on their own. I think too, as we talk of frontline leaders, they knew what they had to do to be successful, but do they know how to speak to it? Do they know how to put names to it? So I think it's also like, as we coach the coach, it's giving them some putting names on their success and being able to highlight it, and then allow them the opportunity to educate and coach their teams on that as well. And also recognizing that everyone is different. So I think it's a lot of different things, but really just making sure that we equip them with what they need to keep focused on what the important aspects are. Knowing their day-to-day is insane.
Yes. And going back to, the previous slide of well, let's see here. So yeah, if you have to keep them focused, otherwise these initiatives fail. So it's not just reacting to deals. It's not just hopping on a call, with other stakeholders when you need. It's like, yeah, you have to do that, but we have to equip them with the programmatic coaching that also allows us to carry out the frontline initiatives, which I think is exactly what you're saying.
Well, and on slide 3, the slide before this, like when you have improving sales skills and improved sales onboarding process and all these things, if your frontline managers aren't developed or aren't able to really delineate how to do that, then all of it doesn't matter anyway, going back to those initiatives. As teams are starting to lean out, as sales teams are maybe slowing their hiring down or letting people go, the people that you have in seat, it's imperative that they're able to be as productive as they possibly can, that they're upskilled. And so, it's also dependent on frontline managers to be able to do any of these things that Forrester puts out. If they're not equipped to do that, then none of it matters, in my opinion.
That's right. We often say internally, the frontline manager is the force multiplier because they are responsible for so many reps. And if you look here, reps want coaching. They want to do a good job. They want to be successful. You aren't having to pull them along. They desire coaching that will allow them to be good at their job. And so the manager has so many reps underneath them. And, I think about Jason's seat, who's above all these managers, all these reps, and, 100 plus. They want to be good at their job. They want good coaching. When we look at what is good coaching or, developing, there's a lot of questions that we ask here because, I think enablement used to be very programmatic and metric centered. Are you working through the modules? Did you, it was content governance was a big part, how many live sends or of something. It can mean a million different things, but these are kind of some of the things we want to talk about today of is coaching happening? How could we know? Where does it live? Are they being coached holistically? Because Kate, you had a really interesting comment about creating that safe mental headspace to be coached, to let your guard down. That's part of holistic coaching. And I know we've talked about that too, of there's deal coaching, there's behavior coaching, there's a million different kinds. So that holistic. So I'd say, let's just kind of get into some of the metrics that help us answer these questions. And so the last thing of why it's important to measure, I'd be curious y'all's take on this of coaching used to be very anecdotal. Yeah, we have good coaching. And what does that mean? But we're finding that people want data-driven, centered. So I'm curious if this resonates with you too, I feel like we're coaching well, or I think we're doing a great job. How this resonates with you versus that not holding up anymore, and it has to be measured and programs have to be, metric driven. Let's start with Jason. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, it almost even starts one step kind of further back from that with, kind of mentioned this earlier, but just setting expectations, I think with the group in terms of what's expected from for managers. And one of the ways that we achieve that is by really having a culture of coaching. And so, some of the ways that we achieve that is, well, one is we actually have dedicated coaches within the organization now, which is really cool. They're really, coaching our managers, who we also call coaches, to really just create that level of importance and expectation. And even when I think back to like our interview process now, like the functional component of to become a manager, 50% of that is actually like a coaching scenario. It's like a coaching role play where we have this scenario, we give it to them ahead of time. And really, like, we did this a few years back, but we kind of shifted the expectation that like, this is the job. The job is coaching and enabling your people to do the best work that they can. And so, when we really start with that, I think that the rest of this becomes really easy, where, of course, it's important for us to measure all of these things, and, in terms of quality and quantity, and having some rigor and some process and formality around coaching. And so, I think it really starts there. But and so it just makes it really easy for us to talk about coaching and the measuring of coaching and all that kind of stuff. And so thought I'd kind of just point that out, that that's really helped us out, is starting with that culture of coaching and setting those expectations for what it means to be a people leader at Jobber. So
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like then going in, to the actual metrics, let's get there. Quantity of coaching is pretty straightforward, right? It's how many times a week does your manager hold sessions? How many one-on-ones? How many team meetings? And, there's some questions around duration, frequency. I had read a book called The Coaching Effect, and they had talked about bi-weekly meetings where one-on-ones were kind of like the sweet spot for most high-performing teams. But I think typically what we see is weekly. A lot of managers have weekly one-on-ones and weekly or bi-weekly team meetings. Now, this needs to be shown for sure that coaching is happening, because a lot of times drive-by coaching is like, you're good. We don't have anything. Your meetings look good. All right, let's cancel. But definitely you should ensure that coaching is happening. So quantity of coaching is first, but I want to hop into something a little more difficult, and be curious how y'all do it, is quality of coaching. So I'll open it up to Malia first, but how would you define quality of coaching? Is it sentiment? Is it overall performance lift? A combo? What do you think?
I'd say a combo of all of it. I think if there's not a sentiment lift, you're not even going to get anyone to meet with you. As a leader, they're not going to buy into anything you have to say if they don't have the credibility or the trust there. To me, I think that's where it's really important that it's a process to what Jason was saying versus an event, because you can't measure an event here and there. Flybys of like, oh yeah, I met with them one time. So to me, like, it's really like, you have to tie it up into like actual KPIs and metrics that you're trying to measure. For my coach team, as we start building out programs, is built around like, what's our customer, the sales team's trying to achieve? Is it net new meetings? Is it greater meetings? Is it gaining executive alignment? So whatever they're trying to achieve is like where our coaching and our training should be focused towards. As a sales leader, it's the same thing. If I'm trying to drive participation rate on my team, I'm going to focus on the middle, my middle players, where I can get a little bit of a lift in them, which would be an exponential lift ultimately for my team production. So I think it has to be tied to metrics, but you have to have some like a roadmap to get to that ultimate metric, and whatever success framework you use. I mean, I'm going to throw Kirkpatrick out there because in enablement, that's a big one we talk about. But you have to start measuring the sentiment first. Like, did the training resonate? Was this how they want to be communicated with? Is this how they want to be coached? Great. Are we starting to hear it? Can we role play it and start seeing it in action a little bit and hearing it over and over again? Perfect. Can I start hearing it in their calls? Am I monitoring some of their like conversation intelligence, and I'm hearing it in the wild? Great. Now let's see it actually like take place and see a metric impacted by it, because they're now getting new meetings or whatnot. So I think you have to like, that's how it's not a one and done quality. I think it's like there's a gradient way of measuring it to make sure that what's working is working. And it's also a way to pivot. If I did a coaching session and like, oh, we loved it, this was great, I'm going to change my whole way of doing things later. And as a leader, I'm like, yes, I made it. But I'm not hearing it in the wild. Yeah. So it's also a way for me to go back and recognize that my quality might have been off for some reason, and really be able to hone in on why it was broken. So I think it's really important. It's not just like, I did some coaching, we're going to see some metric changes. There's ultimately over and over and over. And I've said this, if anyone that I've talked to in the past in my history knows, like, I love the saying for coaching is, you don't do it until they get it right. You do it until they can't get it wrong. And so that's why you can't just have a fly-by coaching session. You make sure you are having a progressive way of measuring that quality of coaching, and that if it's not working, you can quickly pivot and adjust your approach to make sure that changes, any iterations happen quickly.
And this might be super in the weeds, but so in our product, the way we measure sometimes quality or sentiment, we literally have we power the check-ins. And so people select stars on the sentiment thing. But for people who are not ambition users, is it a survey or a Google Forms, or how would you collect that?
I've done both. Like, I've done Google Forms where it's like a quick survey that they can just, what's their quick reaction? Was this impactful to the role? Was I engaged? Am I going to implement these things? And as I've also done, we just did a large scale training where I sent a poll out to the whole org, where it's like, hey, where do you feel like in your level of competency, where do you feel you are currently? And then at the end of our program, we're going to do a quick poll at the end, say, now where do you feel? And do we see an uplift, even just an uptick in their reaction? So it could be sentiment. It could be also just like, I feel a little bit more confident based off of this conversation to actually implement it into it. So I've done kind of both. It could also just be asking them, if you're in a coaching session, hey, how do you feel? Do you feel like you got some good takeaways? What are some takeaways you have? What's a commit you have moving forward? So, I mean, it could be any way to really measure it and ascertain how they felt after that session.
Yeah. So for anyone on the call, it can be as mature or as manual as you are in your process, but it is important to collect. So again, if you have a software like ours that does it for you, great, but don't let that stop you. Ask around, do a Google form. You can measure it that way. So this one is tricky too, effectiveness. And Kate, I'd like to throw it to you of how do you know, and you do all, not just sales, but it seems like go-to-market enablement across different things. So sort of what Malia was saying, different programs have different goals, definitely different KPIs, but how do you know if the coaching that's happening is effective?
So I think I've always thought about enablement as the cool aunt. If you think about growing up, you had your parents who you would maybe go to for advice about certain things. And then you had maybe a cool aunt or uncle that you would go to ask the really tough questions or to be real with. So I think there's a few things here. I think, Jason, you talked about creating a culture of coaching. I think this goes both ways. And Malia, this is also what you touched on. I survey my reps all the time. So I just had a call review session right before this. And at the end of the call, I was like, what did you think about this format? Give me some feedback. How did it compare to last week? So that's a very informal way of surveying them. But that's all part of a bigger picture of me trying to create a culture of coaching that doesn't exist just yet in Melio in the way that I want it to, where we feel really comfortable and again, that psychological safety of being able to give feedback both ways. So I think if I expect reps to be open to feedback that I'm going to give them about their calls, then I want that to go both ways. And that's how we create a true culture of coaching. So I think that's really an important component here. I also send regular surveys via Google Forms, which we mentioned too. And then there's the bigger, we also use WorkRamp to measure confidence before. If it's an org-wide initiative, we'll measure confidence before and after, similar to what you said, Malia. So I think there's the qualitative and the quantitative pieces, because again, I think if reps are not in the right mindset to be coached, they're not going to implement what you're coaching them on, right? If they don't have your trust and if you don't have their buy-in, rather, it's like sales, right? If you don't have full buy-in and you haven't identified a pain that you can solve, they're not going to buy it. So I think that's really important here. I think in terms of metrics and measuring the effectiveness of coaching, this is another place where we're using Gong. So we are tying Gong conversation. So for anybody who doesn't know, Gong is a conversation intelligence software. So it records calls and has some really slick AI features. So we're also figuring out when a good conversation happens at the rep level and it's coached, do the metrics that we measure. So for us, it's the registration on the platform, and then the first time payment is made or received. We're tying the quality of the conversations directly to those two metrics and peppering in, did coaching happen between for this person in these two areas and in that part of the pipeline, and seeing if there are any improvements over time in those conversion rates.
I love that so much. And we do something similar here. And it goes back to like everyone needs something different at different times. But for example, in sales development, a big metric for us that we coach around is connect to meeting set. Basically, how good are you at objection handling, the pitch, et cetera. And so that would be an efficacy metric that we would use to be like, okay, that's something we're always coaching on. We are striving for this North Star. If a particular rep is struggling, they can have coaching. If a particular rep is excelling, because we track it so often, they could do peer-to-peer coaching too. Sometimes you can scale your coaching by having that star player be like, here's what's working for me, and a little bit of peer-to-peer. So but that obviously wouldn't translate to the account executive team, right? So they have something different. It would be more like average deal size, velocity, like we're, product line. So I think it does go back to know the goal of the program per the role or the person. It should be as individualized as possible, because it would be bizarre to measure, AEs or CSMs or support, and they're coaching on the same thing that sales development. So but you should tie it back to a number, and every team should have a couple North Star metrics or big board metrics, and the coaching sessions should inform that, which I love. This next one, it goes back to that initiatives thing. And so what I mean by this one is, so I'll give an example here. Zoom is a client of Ambition, and they came to us wanting to basically sell an expanded product line. Okay, so that was like a big initiative, and they wanted to do it through the methodology of like the Zoom way of selling. And so they needed a way to track that it was happening quantity wise, quality wise. Was it happening all the way down to like how they would end up seeing it is like the number of sessions happened, the sentiment, all of those things. And then also, are we selling more of this thing? Ultimately, the goal. So I'd be curious how you all track, measure, or think or don't think about initiatives being coached on. Is this something that is easy for your orgs to get into? Is it something that matters to you all? Because it goes back to, Malia, what you were saying, like focus, and how do you do it? Is it something through like a seismic, or just opening it up to anyone who wants to take this one?
Yeah,
Okay,
so I'll just
Everyone's like me. Go ahead, Jason.
Right. Yeah, I think for the word focus certainly is a standout. I think even related back to point number 3 there, just on individual versus kind of team-wide goals. I think it's very important to have focus in both of those areas, but like very disciplined focus within each. And so, reps shouldn't really have more than 2 or 3 kind of key areas that they're focused on, or 2 or 3 metrics that they're looking to move. Anything more than that, it's too much. There's way too much to focus on, and it really needs to come down to like what's the most important for them and their success and future customers, et cetera. And so, but more so on the initiative side of kind of team focus, we run a really solid planning process within sales leadership of what are the major kind of company goals that we're looking to achieve over the year. How does that ladder down to the sales organization, and what are our top 3, 4 priorities going to be that help those kind of more company initiatives. And then within each of those priorities, there's going to be a whole subset of different projects and, bets that we're willing to make. And an enablement is a really solid partner for us to go and execute on those things. And so, but again, you can't have more than 2 or 3 that you really kind of need to focus on, especially if you're wanting to see significant progress within the measurements. And so, and then we track those things, and we make it part of our conversations. We have different weekly sessions or bi-weekly sessions on that area. And so love the word focus. You can't focus on too many things. You'll never make any significant progress. And so, and then of course, like we get all of the sales leaders and sales frontline management involved in those decisions and what those priorities are, so that, you know, we have that leverage, right? Because they're the ones that are coaching these 7, 8, 10 different reps. And so we need that leverage point. So we get the team as involved as we can on what are the right initiatives, and what's going to be the best way to enable you to go coach people on these. So I think that's kind of a little bit of how we would tackle it at Jobber. So
Yeah, I love that. And getting them involved early is like how you, I think, you know, the old famous, like, start with why, but like, why is that the initiative? I used to be jokingly calling myself the OKR curmudgeon here internally, because it would be like, I don't even understand why this is a OKR. This is not my priority. I'm supposed to be doing this thing over here. But if you understand how it all works together, of like, no, you don't just go make up your own initiatives over here. It has to tie with this, this, and this. And like, the sooner you can get buy-in, the better. But I'd be curious too, because both, you know, Kate and Malia, you guys have different teams, different revenue orgs, but how do you ensure that the initiatives are being coached on? Is it more on the content side of like creating content and content governance, or Malia, I'll throw it to you.
I think one thing to be thoughtful of too is, like, if we're coaching frontline reps, they might not care what the company-wide OKRs are, right? So I think a lot of it also is like, we know it as like leaders, as like a coach team, as enablement, as whatever our function are, and we're trying to tie it up into it. But I think what's really something to be thoughtful of is, as we're coaching reps on it, it's the WIFM, like, it's more like, how do they get to be successful? How do they get paid? How do they hit quota? How do they stay off PIP? How do they participate? So I think also, like, there's two very different conversations to have. Like, one, yeah, with leadership and like, hey, here's what we're trying to drive. Here's why we're rolling out this training or this program or this content. But then when you're selling it, I say selling not like purposely, when you're selling it to the sales team, it really has to be like about them and like why it's important for them. And I think that's something to be very cognizant of. I feel like oftentimes, like, in enablement and in like a sales adjacent role, it's kind of like, we're going to do all this great stuff. And sales is like, we don't care. We just want to hit our number. We need to know what's successful, and we need your help to get us there. Company OKRs, like, we're trying to do X, Y, and Z, like, cool, I'm on board on it because I want my stock prices to be higher, whatever. I want us to go IPO faster. But I think too, that's just something I want to call out, is like being very cognizant. It's like, what does the teams care about? And recognizing, like, our initiatives are focused up towards the OKR driving it and making sure it's tied into key metrics with the sales team. But also, like, as we're having conversations with the frontline leaders and the ICs, it's like, here's why it's important for you that we're focusing on this, because it's going to help you drive more participation rate as a leader. It's going to help you drive closer to your goal as a rep. So that didn't answer your question, Mary. It was something a little bit different, but I think it's just making sure you're able to message appropriately to all audiences. And I think as a enablement, training, and effectiveness, any sales adjacent org, having the lens of a sales rep, leader, VP, I think is very imperative. And that's where, you know, because you have to know your customer. And I always like to say too, like, if my customer wants to buy a green suit, I'm going to work with them on selling them a green suit. I'm not just going to say, we're doing this for the OKRs and I'm going to sell you a blue suit. I think it's also like knowing what your customer wants and what they're trying to drive, and and then it's our job as like enablement, as training and effectiveness to tie it together so it does work together, and then make sure that the sales is just driving forward what they need to do to be successful.
And I think that is such a light bulb moment for me, of like going back to manager enablement, because yeah, the manager needs to be bought into the why and the OKR, and you're enabling them in that way. And then also teaching them that what you just taught me, of like, the seller also is not going to care. They want to get paid. And here's how you coach them so that you, manager, are achieving the OKR, they are achieving quota and happy, and we are achieving the business initiative. It's not treating the manager the same as the frontline seller, which I think happens where, like, we deploy a training and it goes to everybody, right? The manager gets the same training the employee gets, the seller gets, and then they're just supposed to be the enforcer on the training. And it's like, no, I need a different kind of training to be the enforcer. That's such a light bulb moment, the way you put that, of like, yeah, different audiences. The manager may care, frontline seller may not care, you know. That's great.
I want to piggyback off of that too, actually. This is, I think, one of the the biggest mistakes an org can make is when decision makers get too far from customers and those customer facing teams. So this can happen. I've done this at huge organizations. At Melio, we have a fairly small go-to-market team, so it's a bit looks a little bit different. But I try to involve those reps, the customer facing team, in decisions like this. So it's like if you go to operations and you're like, I want to build me a report that has these columns and these rows, right? And the best way to do that is actually to go to operations and tell them the problem you're trying to solve, right? To say like, here's what I need to see, and let them be the experts and create the report based on their expertise. I think it is very similar with reps in this case. And again, if you have a huge sales force, or you're working at a big org, maybe it's one rep from each team that is really good at poking holes, or really, understands the big picture and how the puzzle pieces fit together. But having a session with them and saying, hey, here, we are launching this initiative. Maybe it's a new product line or a new sales methodology or whatever. And asking them how they think it will benefit them. And then sometimes even I've actually had them be a part of the training and like talk about that part, the with them, Malia. I was actually going to say that exact, when we all talked at once, that was what I was going to say.
Radio station.
The what's in it. Yeah. Oh, the what's in it for me. Like, I think let's make sure that you're not deciding what's in it for the rep. If you have been out of that seat for a long time, especially, like, ask them, how do you see this benefiting your book of business, your customers, and therefore your paycheck? Like, how will you utilize this? And I found that gets so much more leverage when you've involved someone, one of their peers in that conversation. And a lot of times they bring up things that we would otherwise miss because we're not so close to the customer.
And does that sit with enablement? So like, are you, again, back in the weeds, but like, are you in the sales team weekly meeting being like, all right, bring it at me. This is what we're thinking. Give me feedback. Is it like you come to the weekly team meeting?
Yeah. So in my current role, I do participate in all of our business unit meetings and then the weekly team meetings. So the leadership team will surface up an initiative, or maybe it's a new KPI we're measuring. And then I think of myself as the conduit between like the leadership team and the front, customer facing reps, or the customer facing team rather. So yes, that is for me at Melio, because it's still a smallish startup, that fits with me. In the past, when I was a sales director, I also did that with my teams. I think it can sit with different teams depending on your structure and everybody's bandwidth and who it makes the most sense. But for me, it's the only way that I feel I can create an impactful enablement program on when we're going to introduce something new. I always involve the folks who will be using the talk track or whatever.
Yeah. And I imagine that's easier for you, Jason, because you are in the weekly meetings. You have a little bit one step closer, getting all the tea. And, for Malia, if you're coaching the coaches, are you basically teaching them to do this? Are you like, y'all need to be asking for feedback, and you kind of use all the coaches as the force multiplier? Or are you going to like the sales meetings? How are you kind of having these conversations?
A little bit of both. So I have one newer coach on the team. So I've been hopping in that side of the house. And then I have a very tenured coach on the team who, has been doing this for years and being able to kind of gather that feedback. So it's kind of divide and conquer, especially as we have different sides of the business here. But it's a way but I also like make sure that anytime I'm having any conversation is like, please bring the feedback. I try to make sure that transparency is there and that ask and permission is there to provide the feedback as open as possible, because I think that's the part of it too, is like making sure that they have the permission and the trust, and they built that rapport up with you enough to be able to provide real feedback to you. Because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, it was good. And as a sales leader, like whatever, keep going, and they're running off. Yeah, it was fine. It was good. Like, thanks for that stuff, but really wasn't that impactful. So I think that's part of it too. It's like, so we divide and conquer. I have coaches specifically for each side of the house that will attend those weekly ones. Larger scale things, I'll usually come in as well if overlay is needed, but usually we divide and conquer.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great transition too. I heard the word impact, and it's like ultimately at the end of the day, what is the impact of coaching? How do you measure the impact, and who do you report it up into? Who is ultimately the, stakeholder? And Jason, I'll start with you here, because I, internally we say you're the customer. Like, ultimately the business is here to do revenue. And so how do you think about impact of coaching and definitively answering that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the fifth point here in measuring, and I think it's by far the most important. And really, the other four probably don't matter how well you execute on those if this isn't happening. And again, I think it really relates back to setting those very focused goals. Again, no more than 2 or 3 things that you're working on any given point in time. Otherwise, it's too much. It's too much to track. Really hard to understand the impact that it's having. But I think this is just even for myself in this role, in the role that I'm in today, I think it's easy for me to forget how important this is and how valuable it is. And, I recently, we had a social recently, and where a team kind of gathered together, and it was, having a conversation with one of the account executives on the team who'd recently, probably 6 months or so prior, joined the team. And just such amazing things to say about his leader and the coaching style and the impact that it had on him. And his first 6 months were okay. Wasn't like a poor performer per se, but certainly wasn't achieving his goals. And it was just so refreshing to hear from his point of view, just like the impact that it's had on him. And one of the things that we focus on, and Kate, you mentioned this earlier, and I love it, is we try our best to also have all of our reps go through coaching courses, or learn how to be the coach so that you can be the best coachee possible. And this individual had obviously taken it to heart, because he was obviously an engaged coachee going through the coaching motion. And he was just able to he got it. He understood that you're not going to move this number necessarily overnight. Coaching is something that happens over time. And that individual today is not only been promoted, but he's also now one of our mentors on the team, who's going to going through this sales leadership course, who's dabbling in coaching himself now. So as a mentor, he gets the opportunity to coach some others. And so that's just one of many different examples, but one that really resonates with me when I think of the word impact. And really the impact that we're trying to have is on these ICs. And so I think just forget, you can't forget how important this is. And again, like I said, all the other steps there don't really matter if this isn't happening. But yeah, the impact is obviously the most key piece of all of this.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing story, and thinking about holistic coaching too, back what we talked about. And I just saw an article, and I wish I had it here to drop in chat, but it was talking about basically the power that managers have on the mental health of their ICs,
Mm-hmm.
how a manager impacts the humans too. And so I am a revenue marketer. Of course, I feel bad now being it's all about the revenue, right? But you forget at the end of the day, it is, it is people, it is connection, and the impact spans far beyond any KPI, which is very true. Kate or Malia, do y'all have anything you want to add here on impact of coaching that you think about?
I was just going to say there, Mary, I think there's a direct correlation actually between coaches who are holistic and see their role as a mentor and coach, right? Not a manager. I think there's a direct correlation between that type of leadership and your KPIs and your results. And I've definitely seen that in my career where, like the story that Jason shared, where, a rep is underperforming and they received such great coaching that they became, they've excelled quota and kind of turned it around. And I've seen the flip side, right? I've seen really incredible sellers with a not so impactful coach, and they are not motivated. They do the bare minimum. They're not empowered to think innovatively. So I actually think that the two are directly correlated. I think obviously impact is more challenging to measure, some of that qualitative stuff, but I think historically, in my experience as both a leader, IC and enablement, I've seen the two go hand in hand almost every single time, or actually every single time. So I think that that's really important to remember, that there is such a qualitative component of being a really good manager. And I think that regular surveying of the ICs and understanding where your manager's gaps are, both from like that mental health kind of standpoint, and in their like more KPI driven metrics. I think when you marry the two, that gives you the whole picture of the impact that that coach is having.
Yeah, for sure. I think we talked about this a little bit, but for anyone on the call who is, let's say today they're going to leave this webinar, they're just getting started. They want to have a coaching culture like Jason referenced. They're like, they want to start building it. They want to enable their managers. They understand the force multiplier. I'm going to ask each of you, what is like one thing, if you are just starting from the ground up, because you all are very tenured, have seen every step of the way. I feel like if someone's leaving this call today and they're like, yep, I'm going to enable my managers, coaching, what is the one thing to get started, would you say? And I'll just go in order on my screen. So Kate, I'll start with you.
The one thing to take away.
If they're going to start today, they're like, I'm inspired. What's the first place I start, or the one thing I should for sure do?
So I am reading a book called Essentialism right now, and it's like such a game changer. I don't know if you all have heard of it or read it. Highly recommend it. And then one of my other favorite books is Atomic Habits, and the two work really well together. So Essentialism is about doing more with less. So they talk about how like priority, the word priority is actually a singular word, and it was made, priorities was created like in the 19th century, something like that. I think like keeping one thing as your one priority and your one area of focus and getting really good at that is sort of a great place to start, because it can be overwhelming in the beginning. And so I think really honing in on that one priority. And then the second thing is from Atomic Habits, where they talk about goals fail because of a lack of a system. So coming up with a system, whether that's, for me as a frontline manager, I had a system of one-on-ones that I kept track in Microsoft OneNote. I would, jot down, I had a template that I used for every single one-on-one. And the last thing that we talked about was sort of like, what are you going to work on between now and the next one-on-one? And that was the way that we started the next one-on-one. So that was a system for me that helped me measure my effectiveness over time. And it help me stay organized and not show up to a one-on-one and be like, oh, what do you want to talk about? And not bring value on that conversation. So I think those are the two things. Think about your one priority that you one area of focus, and two, make sure you have a system in place to set yourself up for success with keeping that priority the main priority and measuring kind of how you track.
Yeah. I love that. That's great. Jason, what about you? I feel like you're very tenured in this too, directly working with managers, but what is one thing you would have people take away?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for. I'm sure you're not being too prescriptive with the exact answer, but I think of, if I were to go back in time and we're hiring our first few managers or whatnot, and we've certainly done this over time. I think I would have started with framing the role probably a little bit differently than when we first started. And so, our sales managers, their titles are sales managers, but a number of years back, we reframed the role and the title, and it's more so a coaching role than it is like a manager role. And so, and this just kind of goes back to the expectation setting I was kind of speaking to earlier, where we kind of changed our entire philosophy and approach to hiring people leaders. And, the interview process is so much focused on coaching and how to coach your reps through, tough scenarios or difficult situations. And so think reframing the role as to being a coach and a people leader, and enabling your reps to be the best selves and achieve their goals, rather than managing people, and then allowing those managers to be the best coaches possible. And so going through coach training, which we do today. But again, that was something we implemented kind of a number of years after we had a little bit of a manager team. But it's certainly been our approach thus far, and I think we've seen great success from it. And so I think that's a way of getting that culture of coaching that we're kind of speaking to. So
Yeah, I love that. And that's so smart. Malia, I'm going to ask you, and I don't know if it's going to be meeting in a box or not, but I'm obsessed with meeting in a box. So if not, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we need to hear what meeting in a box is.
Anytime. I think if I was looking at manager enablement, it would really be working with them on what are some core competencies that make a rep successful. And then how do you work with each individual on your team and look at the core competencies you've identified and prioritize using Kate's feedback and Jason's on focus. Prioritize where the focus will be on, where you can start up-leveling them immediately within those core competencies. So if I was a frontline leader, first-time leader, I'd be like, okay, maybe you were just an IC and you can say what made you successful, work with your peers, work with your director, your VP, or enablement teams. But what are some core competencies it takes to be a successful rep at that company at this time in the environment that we're in? And then how do you really hone in on your coaching behavior to those skills that's going to immediately impact those metrics that you're trying to drive? So maybe there's 3 to 5 core competencies. Look at your team individually. Where within the core competencies are everyone lacking situationally? And then start focusing on your behavior on that. Maybe someone's great at making dials, but they're awful at admin. Maybe someone's great at setting appointments, but awful at discovery. So whatever those are, if I were to give any advice to a leader on the call right now, it's like, if you haven't identified what you feel makes a rep successful, what you've seen historically, look at your team, where are the biggest opportunities for each person, and then start honing in your coaching there and go until they not until they get it right, but until they can't get it wrong. And then you move on to the next competency. And that's how you really, to me, start incrementally driving behavior change and skill change in a strategic and programmatic way.
Yeah, so smart. I'm going to open up questions into the chat or the Q&A. If anyone has them, feel free to drop them in. Actually, I'm having a hard time getting my Q&A, but put them in the chat because I'm over in there. So feel free to chat any questions for the group if you have them. And then, something we ask all of our guests, a theme this year, kind of goes into what ambition is and who we are. But I would love to ask each of you what being greater in 2023 means to you. So give me personal, professional, mine has been to, going back to Kate's word, prioritize a little bit better holistically in my life. So I'm trying to set priorities as mine. But Jason, what about you? How do you plan to be greater in 2023?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. From a personal perspective, I think just enabling and allowing my directors and leaders to just be their best selves. It's not due to a lack of trust or anything like that, but obviously I love what I do and I love sales and our organization. I tend to get a little bit too in the weeds sometimes and get too involved, which kind of, blocks decisions or kind of, holds things up. I have a ton of smart individuals on my team, most of them way more capable than I am in all of their functional areas. And so I guess just trying to get out of their way more so. I think part of it is passion. Also, part of it is I've kind of grown with the organization, so I've been so involved at all levels, and so just getting out of their way, allowing them to be their best selves and get the work done. As for the team, one kind of topic that we've been kind of discussing recently. So in addition to culture of feedback, we also have a great culture. In addition to a great culture of coaching, we also have a culture of feedback, and we also speak to not only having that or applying that feedback when things are not going well or things are challenging, but also when things are going good or great. Mm-hmm. And so we need to continuously level up and get better and improve as a sales organization. And so one of the ways we've been talking about doing that is just holding ourselves accountable doesn't matter what role you're in or who, you're keeping accountable. I heard a quote recently, I forget who, where the quote's from, but, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was along the lines that, like, if you see something that's not up to standard or substandard, and you just kind of let it go and you just kind of let it fly by, you are now somewhat directly setting a new standard. And so, just trying to further embrace that culture of feedback, hold each other accountable. And I think that's just a really amazing thing for us to work on this year, to just get that 1% better, every day, every month, et cetera. So those are two things that come to mind.
I love that so much, especially like not just what's wrong and what's right, because I always think that helps me self-regulate or self-navigate when I know both ends of the spectrum, right? Then I'm like, okay, I know where to lean more, where to lean away from, versus just if you only have one guardrail, you're just going to potentially fall off that way. So I think that's so smart. And then I'll let you tell us last, Malia, how are you going to be greater in 2023?
So my team, we're building right now. So I think it's going to be really leaning in with them. There have really, really great people on the team. So leaning in with them to really drive impact, I think, on the sales org, especially given obviously all the buzzwords we're hearing, economic climate and uncertainty. So I think it's really like my grader is going to be dependent on my team's success and making sure that they're enabled and they're equipped with what they need to make sure our customers and their customers, et cetera. So I think it's really going to be leaning into our orgs and our customers and making sure that we're driving the right impact, going back to that word, to be able to navigate some of these times. I mean, I think I'm not obtuse. So I recognize that it's hard to come into a cell and be like, rah, rah, rah. So I think just really making sure that with programs we're driving are to really impact the frontline sales org, to equip them with what they need to navigate these waters in a better way. Different messaging. So I think we'll be up-leveling the org. We'll really, with my team leaning in and helping lead the charge on that, I think is really what's going to make me feel like I've had a good 2023.
Leading from the front. I love it. I am so grateful to everyone for joining today, the panelist, host, but also the guests. So thank you all for being a part of the conversation. I think we're seeing all the articles and the headlines about the rise of enablement and the investment in enablement. And I'm sure everyone on this call is like, duh, should have been doing that years ago, but I'm glad it's getting the attention it deserves. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing in the chat, everyone, how you plan to be greater and questions. And can everyone find you on LinkedIn? I think you're probably all there. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Everyone connect on LinkedIn. I will connect with everyone there as well. We'll send out the recordings, some follow-up materials, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for being here.
So
thank you so much for having us.